Hello, we're Myrtha Pools and welcome to the first in our Ask the Expert series, which seeks to delve into key topics surrounding the UK leisure industry. During this episode, we're exploring how Passivhaus principles and collaborative engagement may just hold the key to creating low-carbon environments. You'll hear firsthand about data-led insight and some of the key challenges that lay ahead for the leisure industry. I'm Tom Snee, and to discuss this with me today, delighted to be joined by Kevin Burns of Myrtha Pools alongside Mark Gowdridge of GT3 Architects. Both together are creating something very special in Spelthorne in the southeast of the UK, delivering the largest wet and dry Passivhaus leisure centre in the country. Kevin and Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to start by speaking to you first, Kevin, actually. What are some of the key issues that are facing public sector swimming pools in the UK right now?
Well, the facts are that nearly half the pools in the UK are more than 30 years old, and yet demand is still rising all the time. Local authorities need solutions that can make short-term and long-term impacts on the biggest cost outlay, which is the running of the pool. As well as meeting net zero targets, of course, heating a swimming pool, both the water and the surrounding air, accounts for nearly 40% of a facility's running cost, which is extortionate in true terms. These changes can't be made in isolation. We need experts from across the construction industry to work closely with local authorities to educate them on best practice and create a sustainable roadmap for the future.
Now, Mark, obviously GT3 have a lot of experience and specialism in the leisure industry. How is the design and build of a pool changing? How has it changed in the recent years?
I think we've seen a market shift over the last 4 years in terms of how people use pools. But not only that, I would split this into two. One is about how communities are using the pools, but also about the running costs and the actual deliverability of swimming pools now. You don't have to kind of look too far to see the problem in terms of how people are financing pools and actually running pools. They are really expensive to run. And so our briefs now, when we're being challenged by clients, is to reduce water consumption, to reduce the heating of swimming pools. These are the extreme costs that are faced by operators today. And you'll hear in a minute in terms of how Spelthorne's achieving that through that water consumption, reducing water consumption, reducing energy costs in terms of Passivhaus principles and Passivhaus design. We're finding that this is the shift. It's about how we can actually make pools more energy efficient. The other side of it is the community use. We're finding that more and more people are demanding flexibility in water space. It's something that we're working very closely with Myrtha Pools around to look at how we break water space into segments for different use. And actually how people use water. It's amazing how communities now, how many proportions of communities can't swim in chlorinated water. These were people with asthma conditions, skin conditions. And so as well as the pool tank itself, we're now looking at how we filtration water or filter water through what we call microfiltration. And that all ties back to these Passivhaus principles about creating water quality that creates much more, if you like, available pool water for wider community use.
So we trailed it in the intro and you mentioned it there. Tell us a bit more about Spelthorne and what the project actually entails.
So Spelthorne is it's the world's largest wet and dry Passivhaus leisure centre. Passivhaus leisure centres have not been too commonplace because of the differential in temperatures between wet and dry spaces. You've got really hot spaces in areas such as pool halls, etc., and then you've got really cold spaces or cooler spaces in fitness suites and studios. And that whole temperature differential has been a big problem to control. There's been examples around Europe, in Germany, where there's been pure swimming pools that have been created on a Passivhaus principle. You've seen Exeter Splash that's been created recently, which is predominantly wet leisure. Spelthorne's different in a sense that it's 50-50 in terms of a ratio between wet and dry leisure space. And this is what the Passivhaus Institute are really interested with alongside the BRE, Sport England, because this is a groundbreaking scheme about how to create savings, which we're actually achieving savings up to 70% on energy through Passivhaus design, which is an absolute game changer for exactly the reasons I've just said previously about how we need to think differently about the running costs of these facilities. And also showing that, whilst this scheme is a £43 million scheme, it's not cheap. People think that Passivhaus costs money. Okay, it might add a bit to the budget, but not to the extremes that people believe it to. The actual payback and what we're showing on Spelthorne, the payback through the savings that we create on Passivhaus design is quite quick. We're also looking at the carbon side of how we deliver this. Obviously, the climate emergency that sits at the doorstep of most councils now. We have to actually react to that. And again, working with Myrtha around their stainless steel pool tanks is now showing that we're actually getting around about 40% carbon savings compared to a concrete tank. These are huge kind of data requirements that the Passivhaus Institute need. And obviously the Passivhaus Institute are now looking very closely at kind of wider rollout of these Myrtha tanks because of that energy save or that carbon saving that we're actually proving at Spelthorne. And I think from Myrtha's point of view, it's something that it's been there probably forever and a day. It's not something they've actually pinpointed as one of the big attributes of their system. So it's about recognizing some of these advantages as well.
Brilliant. Well, let's dive into the weeds a little bit. What are some of the kind of key technical specifications around Spelthorne?
So I think with any passive design moving forward, and I think, this is where we're working very closely with Sport England now, because the lessons learned, if you like, in terms of kind of rewording that question slightly, what are the lessons learned from Spelthorne? It absolutely completely changes what our RIBA kind of design schedule has. We have to have collaboration right from the start. We have to have the key kind of components of mechanical and electrical, structure and civils right at the outset of projects, far earlier than what we would normally do, because Passivhaus requires early involvement of all these disciplines, the mechanical requirements, the plant, etc., far earlier. It takes slightly longer in terms of actually delivery because of the detail that you have to go into to actually create these energy efficient boxes. And that is something that we're trying to roadmap with Sport England about what that program looks like. We're finding that the air tightness of these buildings significantly lowers. We have to get that down significantly. And what that does in turn, it actually creates an environment that when you step into a Passivhaus designed leisure centre, you can feel the difference, you can smell the difference, you don't smell chlorine, you can feel the air quality is so much different. But that collaboration is absolutely critical. It's the essential component of Passivhaus design. You need, when you're writing your briefs now, and this is what we're finding on every single facility leading from Spelthorne, is that the client brief right at the start, whilst historically sustainability has taken quite a low kind of let's leave that till later on, it has to be front and center. Because if you bring in passive design principles or passive design fully into a scheme, it has to be built into the design brief. You can't, Spelthorne have shown if you actually start integrating it into the kind of concept design or later design stages, it becomes a problem because of the design. Things like the pool hall, for example, the swimming pool that now orientates south. If you look at Sport England's documents, they're still suggesting orientate it north. A lot of those principles just flip on its head. So you have to integrate it at brief stage. You have to collaborate very early on.
Thank you very much, Mark. There's some really great insight there. Kev, we'll just wrap up with you. Actually, obviously, we talked about the current state of play at the start of this video. But what does the future hold for public sector pools?
I think in real terms, we're at a major crossroads with our leisure efforts. I think technology is a fantastic enabler, but more education is needed amongst all parties so that the right investment can pay long-term dividends for all pool operators. Where local authorities can't afford the expensive outlay, you can make incremental gains by replacing pool walls or pool floors to help meet the net zero targets. And our own renovation system is perfect for that kind of thing. We know from our own research that our pools have and do have a 40% smaller carbon footprint than traditional methods of construction, And Spelthorne can enable us and the industry to grow a better understanding of how working to Passivhaus standards will work on a wider scale for the industry. It'll create cost savings, but more importantly, we'll have a more healthy and passive building that will support local authorities in achieving net zero targets.
Brilliant. So there we have it. That was the first in our series of Ask the Expert. Thank you very much to Kevin and to Mark for their time today, and thank you to you for tuning in. We hope you found this episode informative, and we look forward to welcoming you back next time around.